the EU summit, EU-Ukraine summit. Hanna, the floor is yours. We have just finished our meeting with the EU Commission chaired by Mr. Engineer, and it is very important that this 24th summit between the EU and Ukraine will be held here, and this proves that the European Union consistently has been supporting Ukraine. And it's my pleasure to give the floor to the EU ambassador to Ukraine, His Excellency Mr. Matti Maasikas, and today we have here the representatives of the parliamentary factions. Mr. Maasikas, the floor is yours.
Дякую, Hanno. Мені чути?
Thank you, Hanna. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Good morning,
Hanna, for the invitation to open this immensely important seminar. While Ukraine is fighting a brutal, unprovoked, and illegal full-scale military invasion by Russia, the EU is unwavering. We will continue to deploy all the means at our disposal to support Ukraine, its independence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty. Soon, we will mark the sad anniversary of the first year of the start of the invasion, but it has changed our whole lives, but it has not changed who we are. Standing up for the fundamental freedom and principles that we share, and recognizing that Ukraine is heroically defending these principles, these freedoms, these values, but also Europe's security. In spite of the invasion, Ukraine has accelerated the reforms that are bringing your country closer to the European Union. Ukraine is a European state. Its future is in the European Union. We share this vision that was enshrined by the European Council decision 23rd of June last year to grant Ukraine the candidate status. Ukraine has shown very good progress on working on the 7 recommendations that accompanied the EU's decision. Indeed, as you said, Hanna, tomorrow and the day after, there will be excellent opportunities to compare our notes on the progress, not only on EU support, and there will be new things to announce there as well, but also to compare our notes on Ukraine's homework and to lay out what needs to be done more, what needs to be done in the near future. Enlargement as a policy, and I don't hide it from you. Ukraine has re-energized the enlargement policy of the European Union, and at the same time, much, if not almost everything, there depends on the candidate country itself. Not only implementing EU's legislation, but also showing track record of implementing daily, in reality, these laws. Now, want to highlight. Count also the 18 billion euro macro-financial assistance for this year. The EU and its member states have supported Ukraine during the war, during the invasion, by 50 billion euro, making it by far the biggest donor, and I'm immensely proud of that. Not only have Ukraine's reforms continued, but Ukraine's, and that's even more important, Ukraine's democracy has continued to function. And there again is where you come in. Ukraine's almighty civil society. We are working closely with you, and we are counting on you to keep the government and state authorities in check. Please keep up this important work. Of course, we are all patriots now. And at the same time, Ukraine's authorities still need your support, your demanding support. Thank you very much for this, and I wish this seminar fruitful discussions and good results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure that today, besides the implementation of 7 criteria, we will also focus in on cooperation between Ukraine and the EU for seize and confiscation of assets of Russia Federation, tougher sanctions, and also military support, because we are all working for Ukraine's victory and defeating Russia. So thank you, Ambassador, and now it's my honor to give a floor to Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, the head of the European Integration Committee of Ukrainian Parliament, to provide her assessment of Ukraine's progress after the candidate status. Ivanna personally invested a lot of efforts, and we together also traveled to different capitals with our friends from European Parliament, like Andrius Kubilius with the United for Ukraine network. So, Ivanna, what are your expectations from the Ukraine-EU summit, and how you, as a chairwoman of the committee, and maybe also as a representative of opposition, assess the implementation and expectations from EU?
Do we speak in English?
Ні, ми говоримо українською.
Окей,
Так, у
говоримо
нас є
українською.
переклад. Так.
Окей, в нас є переклад і
We have translation today, so perhaps it's better if I speak Ukrainian. And I think that many our friends are able to follow our discussion even in Ukrainian. I'm very grateful to the organizers of this discussion. It is hugely important that all of us working in different areas and promoting European integration of Ukrainian would be able to continue this work towards integration, and to continue that intensive efforts which was started when we were working for the gaining of the candidate status. And I believe that gaining of the candidate status, it was the result of joint effort of the parliament, the president, and the government of Ukraine. I believe it's very good when the country poses very ambitious goals for itself, because when you have ambitious goals, this inspires you to make everything possible to implement these goals, to make them true. And His Excellency has mentioned that vast support that Ukraine had received from the European Union, including military support, economic, monetary support, and even the moral support. And now we are all thinking together how to punish Russia for the war crimes, for genocide, for the crime of aggression, and how to turn the frozen assets or confiscated Russian assets into resources which will be available for reconstruction and restoration of the Ukrainian territories after the war. And now I would like to focus on the recommendations which were provided to Ukraine and how we worked on those recommendations. As I mentioned, it's good to have, it's good for a country to have an ambition, and all the members of Ukrainian government should these days work on the opening of the negotiations about future membership and start thinking how to reach this full membership. I would encourage my colleagues to do this very professionally, to think carefully about the volume and the scale of tasks which should be resolved, and as His Excellency rightly mentioned, there is not only the huge volume of legislation which has to be harmonized, but it has to be implemented, and that is even more difficult and more important. That is what I want to underscore, that we should deprive of illusions and to realize that there is no other or alternative or optional way to the European Union except for cover the same path, the same route which was done by the previous candidate countries. And we should keep in mind that the candidate status was awarded to Ukraine, was granted to Ukraine to some extent in advance, under some conditions which required a lot of work from us. And here we have to be very honest and open to ourselves, actually. I'm worried when I hear in the parliament that we have fulfilled all the 7 recommendations, because I do not think that's true. And even Venice Commission, having reviewed our draft law about the selection of the Supreme Court judges, had expressed its not only negative opinion, but abstained from sending its observers to the selection committee. And I believe that we have to correct the situation and then wait for the intermediary review from the European Commission about the quality of what we have done. This is needed in order to Ukraine be able to correct the shortcomings, the mistakes in the implementation of the requirements, and by autumn 2023 to be ready to seek for the positive opinion from the European Union about implementation of the recommendations. And we have best friends, we have the best lobbyists of Ukraine in the EU, and one of those people during our meeting, he mentioned to me that no PR campaign would allow you to open the negotiations and to get access to the EU unless you carry out your homework 110%. The second friend of Ukraine has said that this is not the question whether a glass is half full or half empty. The question for the question and the discussion about accession will be whether the glass is full or it is more than full, and this is the situation with the amount of work that we have to do in order not to waste this unique chance which we have today. We have to make a good use of the personal interest of the EU Commission leadership and EU Parliament leadership in the accession of Ukraine. And this openness, this readiness to work hard. These are things which I like most in the approach of current authorities. We should not create great expectations and then fail to satisfy these expectations and postpone the beginning of negotiations and the successful implementation of the requirements. I believe that possible disappointment of Ukrainian society in case of our failure to satisfy the requirements would be extremely big and will have extremely negative impact on the future of Ukraine. That's why we have to put aside PR campaigns and focus on the hard work, and especially because we have all the opportunities to implement the requirements fully. Thank you, Ivanna. I've been following the expression of Vadym, and I think that he agrees with you. Today we have handy the opinion of many experts who carried out the assessment about readiness, and Alyona Hetmanchuk, director of the New Europe Center, is ready to present.
Andrius Kubilius, member of Ukrainian Parliament. Member of European. So one day Ukrainian Parliament will, the Ukraine joining EU, and who knows. Andrius, we are really very thankful for your contribution to the candidate status. So for your powerful speeches in Berlin, in Paris, like you convinced many partners to grant Ukraine candidate status. And it's a true geopolitical signal on behalf of the EU to Russia that you consider Ukraine in the future as a member of the European Union. So what are your expectations from the Ukraine-EU summit, and also as a former Prime Minister of Lithuania? What are your recommendations? Because you were among those who helped Lithuania to become both NATO and the EU members. So what are your recommendations to Ukrainians now? Please, now the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. Good morning to everybody. Thanks a lot, Hanna. Really, all the best to all of you. You know, happy to see Ivanna, Vadym, you know, and somewhere, as I understand, Alyona. So really all good friends, you know, and fighters not only for Ukrainian independence and Ukrainian, you know, future as a European country, but also fighters for the future of European continent. So definitely it's very important summit which is coming. I agree in some way with Ivanna that, you know, really you need to have some kind of realistic approach. You know, and really to do everything, you know, that this realistic approach would be convincing to all the Western community. So this is one thing. I am not so sure if 2 years, you know, announced by Prime Minister Schmigel is very realistic, but you know, you are allowed to have some kind of dreams. I am calculating, at least when I looked into, you know, our own calendar, that 3 years or 4 years for negotiations are quite realistic. This was, you know, our experience, 3 years. Polish experience was 4 years for negotiations. Then, of course, you know, treaty ratification and so on. But that is, you know, what we are trying to speak here in the parliament, that till the end of this decade, till 2030, it's realistic to conclude the whole process of Ukrainian, you know, Ukraine becoming member of EU with negotiations and you know, ratification and so on. So it's better to do it till 2029. There are 2 reasons why. Because, you know, second Lutsk summit of all the European heads, you know, should be, you know, exactly on 600 years anniversary of the first summit. And then, you know, of course, 2029 is also, you know, elections to European Parliament, and you know, Ukrainians need to be ready to become members of European Parliament. So that is, you know, and this is really, it sounds maybe, you know, a little bit, how to say, you know, with some kind of humor, but it's really serious and realistic. Now, what is most important, of course, is you know, to overcome you know, European very well developed bureaucratic approach to, you know, to all the processes, where, you know, unfortunately bureaucracy, as it was shown, you know, for example, with Western Balkan integration, is very good to kill, you know, all the enlargement processes, you know, in this, you know, very effective bureaucratic anti-enlargement, you know, abilities of European bureaucracy. So I see it as really, you know, big problem. So there are challenges on both sides. On one side, Ukraine needs to make all the needed reforms. Definitely, you know, to fulfill all the criteria. This, you know, much better than you know, Alyona and all other experts are very good in evaluating, you know, all shortcomings which Ukraine needs to overcome. But I see also the problems on the EU side, because if the processes will go in the same way as they were going with Western Balkans, so unfortunately that would be again very big and very bad strategic mistake, you know, from EU side. So I'm always repeating that, you know, we need to see much larger picture, not only, you know, how Ukraine is fulfilling the whole, all the criteria, which is, as I said, very important, but also how to raise political will on the EU side to move forward, because Ukrainian integration towards EU and NATO will have, you know, major positive consequences for the whole European continent, even including, you know, Russia with all its, you know, problems, aggressiveness, and so on and so on. I will not go into that, you know, topic, but that is what I see, you know, that we can, you know, with Ukrainian success, we can have ability to achieve much broader results, which would be beneficial really for the whole European continent, including European Union, and that is why really I would like to see much stronger geopolitical ambitious vision from EU side, you know, on how this integration can go, not to leave it, you know, with what I call, you know, this bureaucratic possibility to create new and new, obstacles. So that is why it's so important really to achieve that negotiations for EU membership would be started this year. All those, discussions, should the report, special report on Ukraine should be made by Commission in the spring, or should it go with traditional enlargement report in the autumn? But in any case, it's very important that at the end of this year, it would be very clear that Ukraine is starting negotiation. Because if that will not be achieved, then, it would be difficult to imagine that in next year, 2024, any kind of, important geopolitical decisions will be made by EU, because EU will be in elections, in European elections. And that is, how time can run very fast without really good strategic, and geopolitical progress. So that is why I'm repeating that Ukraine's integration, geopolitical integration into the West, into EU and NATO, is no less important than, Leopards or Abrams for Ukrainian defense. This is my, let's say, geopolitical line. And I can explain why, this, why I think in such a way. I was saying some comments on that. I put a small piece, you can read it on my Twitter, and then exactly on that. In some way, I see again very similar, unfortunate possibility of how, on our side, how discussions will go. All of us, we have seen all that, difficulties of some capitals, Berlin including, how it was difficult for them, to move from total denial of, delivering Leopards at the end, to come down to decisions that, yes, we shall deliver. So for me, it's very difficult to understand why such a decision was not made from the very beginning. So it looks like the same is going on with integration issues. Now we hear, resistance from different capitals, on a proper language in conclusions of the summit, where, ambassadors are spending, hours and hours on discussing one or two words, in the conclusions on the beginning of negotiations. When at the end, I hope that nevertheless, EU will be able to come down to such a, decision, but with a lot of political capital spent on some not most important things. Discussing two words and so on. So that is why I'm saying in a very clear way that this geopolitical, goal for Ukraine integration, we need to consider as, again, I repeat, that it's important in the same way as it is important, to have Leopards and Abrams for Ukrainian army. And that is why, in my view, we need to look how to consolidate Western geopolitical will, to achieve integration goals, and to use that, again, experience which the Western community managed to show that for consolidation of political will, it's very good to have some kind of, military Rammstein. So that is why I am saying that it's time for the Western community, for EU itself, to establish something like, integration Rammstein, where the political will would be really on EU side, on the Western side, consolidated into a very clear strategy and clear understanding why Ukrainian integration towards EU and NATO is important not only for Ukraine itself, but also for the whole Western community, for the whole European continent, and then to start to look how to realize this, ambition, how to put clear messages to our bureaucracy. Of course, not allowing Ukraine to escape from all the needed reforms and needed criteria, but 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 also not allowing the whole integration process to go into such disaster what we have seen with Western Balkan integration. And I stop here.
Thank you, Andrius. As always, you are very ambitious, and we would like to see also that before NATO summit in Lithuania, in Vilnius this year, actually when Ukraine signed an application for accelerated accession to NATO, it also demonstrates that there is also a sense of urgency, not just for weapons delivery, as you mentioned, tanks, because this delay with weapons costed us a lot of lives of the brightest, the bravest people of our country. So this is why I agree that besides modern weapons, tanks, and we hope to believe we get F-16 in the nearest future, but also this integration, it's another powerful geopolitical signal on behalf of Western community that Ukraine is not considered anymore as a buffer zone, or that Ukraine is considered as an equal partner and in the future as a members of EU and NATO. So now before we will have like for one question and start the session with presentation of our civil society and experts community EU integration check. Then Vadym, яка ваше бачення щодо виконання?
Vadym, how do you think how quickly Ukraine is implementing the recommendations, and whether the negotiations have a chance to start by the end of this year, and what is your expert opinion as to the success, as to the progress? And on February 7th, we will have an anniversary from the moment when the EU accession was introduced into the Ukrainian constitution. Thank you, Hanna. I'm very grateful to that work that Ukrainian NGOs and Ukrainian civil sector contributed to the integrational work. I believe that the strong will, which is now demonstrated jointly by Ukrainian government, parliament, and the president, is good indicator that the whole country now has a political will to join the EU and NATO, and we are eager to work on gaining the same strength of political will from the EU. I believe that many people here in Ukraine realize the technical aspects of this process, and I think less people understand the complexity of this task in political aspects. This is the fourth year, the fourth anniversary, as you correctly mentioned, since the moment when we had made this aspiration in our constitution. And since that moment when we started discussions about military aid and about other types of aid, we have gained experience how to convince that the government and civil society are ready in Ukraine. I recollect when Ivanna and I met with Chancellor Scholz, or better to say with the staff of his chancellery, and I've heard about, for the first time, about Iris-T, and I recollect the reaction of a German official who have heard about Iris-T, and he advised us to forget this name, and this only emphasizes the starting point from which we started, and this emphasizes never say never, nothing is impossible, but still, when we are thinking about the terms and the dates, I agree with Mr. Kubilius. Ukrainian accession requires from the European Union, requires much from the European Union in terms of the change of its standpoint. The situation that we witness with Northern Macedonia, with Montenegro and Serbia, this situation demonstrates that those countries are ready. They satisfy all the requirements of the European bureaucracy, they satisfy the benchmarks, etc. But the process is political, and the assessments which will be carried out in terms of Ukraine and the benchmarks which will be assessed, all that will be done from political point of view, and here much will depend on the NATO summit. Of course, European Union, this is about economy and investments, while NATO is about security. And I believe that those two aspects are very closely interrelated, and there is a growing understanding among our European partners that it is very important to send a signal both to Ukraine and to the global world that Ukraine will be a member of the European Union and NATO. Of course, Ukraine has to become the full-fledged EU member, and the shifts, global shifts which started in Ukraine, they have speeded up the process. Of course, here much will depend on the political will, but political will depend very much on the realities of today, because political will can be formatted to satisfy the requirements of reality. And here much will depend on the ability to adapt procedures in result of the legislation reviews. I can provide an example of the Venice Commission and its negative assessment of the Supreme Court judges selection. It is not a representative example, because Venice Commission sometimes changes its opinions. You might recollect that in its opinion about the law itself, they were satisfied, but later on they decided that the law was not very good and changed its opinion. I believe that we are able to introduce required amendments to the law in order to satisfy them. But nevertheless, this emphasizes that we have to keep in mind and pay attention how the European institutions function, and in order to be able to synchronize our efforts with the requirements of the European institutions. To be able to present our positive achievements to our European partners. And I fully agree that the European Union now has to prove that the EU is a mighty political actor, and not only in terms of economics, but also in terms of politics. I believe that keeping all these nuances in mind would allow us to move forward more efficiently. Thank you. Thank you, Vadym, for the optimism, for optimistic point of view. I like your idea that political will could be trained, and I believe that this is a good example that the training, so to say, of political will could be done via successful anti-corruption measures and delays with the appointment of leader.
Суспільство, і тоді ми би відкрили вже загальну сесію запитань від журналістів, тому що
This is a good example. Dear colleagues, I hope you still have time to stay a bit longer and to hear the results of our assessment of the survey carried out by the Anti-Corruption Center. We'll have 40 minutes. Let us not waste time. I'm Sergei Senorenko. I have double capacity here. I am a moderator, and at some moment I will contribute to the presentations because it's my honor to be a member of this consortium, which for the third time is now presenting the progress in Ukraine's implementation of the EU recommendations. In any case, such assessments are needed for Ukraine to move forward successfully. It's my pleasure to give the floor to Alyona Hetmanchuk, Director of the New Europe Center. Thank you, Sergei. Before presentation of the last candidate check report, I will make a short introduction. The idea of the candidate check, which is an independent evaluation of implementation of those 7 recommendations for the EU to be a candidate country. The idea of the candidate check appeared immediately after accession of the candidate session. At that moment, we realized our responsibility for the implementation of those 7 recommendations, because we had contributed a lot of effort into the gaining of candidate status by Ukraine, and in many European capitals, especially in those capitals which were skeptical about Ukraine's accession, we made commitment on behalf of the civil society to do our best and to promote the process. So it was a sort of our commitment to the governments of the skeptical countries that we will follow up on the Ukraine's implementation of requirements and do our best. Then, although in some capitals people perceive the recommendations as past conditions for Ukraine's candidate status, we had been perceiving them as preconditions, and we believe that those recommendations are interrelated to the future negotiations and sections of future negotiations. For example, the first unit is very closely connected to chapters 23-24. Actually, this is the actual preparatory work for the future negotiations, especially when we are willing to start negotiations as soon as possible. So, in order to start negotiations, we have to do this work. Truly to do it, not just on paper. Thinking about ambitions, we understand that 2 years might be not enough to start negotiations. Let us look at the results of candidate check. We have 5.8 points out of possible 6 points. The least success we have in the reform of the Constitutional Court, then anti-oligarch reform. All the rest indicators clearly show positive growth. Of course, Ukraine still has to do much, but still, this is a proof of consensus that Ukraine has to start, which is needed for Ukraine to start its access to the EU. As I mentioned, the first criteria on this slide is about the selection of the Constitutional Court judges. And this is the least successful point. Mykhailo, maybe you may comment about this point and about the Venice Commission that has been changing its approach. I will try to discuss it briefly. This will be not just an expert opinion, but an assessment how this influences the whole issue. Let us go back to 2020 when the Constitutional Court cancelled the electronic declarations of Ukrainian officials, and then President Zelensky applied to the Venice Commission, and the Venice Commission issued an opinion that the selection to the Constitutional Court was biased and prejudiced, and they advised to change the selection procedure for the Constitutional Court judges. For 2 years, nothing had been done. By the moment when we gained our candidate status, I'm grateful to my colleagues who recognize the role of the civil society in this process. This was Mr. Galaychuk and Ivanna who contributed to that, as well as to all the members of parliament. This was a good example how many teams contributed to the process. Unfortunately, later, after having gained the candidate status, and although understanding that the candidate status is a good locomotive for reforms, but nevertheless, Ukraine has not started to move quickly in this area. We have witnessed the law, which was very quickly passed by the parliament, nevertheless provided no independence for the Constitutional Court. Many times we applied to the parliament what had to be done. Then Venice Commission produced its 2 opinions, and they advised to introduce the 7th member of the selection committee. And then the EU requested to introduce changes to the law, and the Vice Prime Minister expressed several strange messages. And then the government tried to do something to negotiate with the European Commission, but now the government has found that nothing could be done at that level that at which they expected, and Now, the issue has reached the top level, and unless the positive message about the constitutional court is delivered to the European Union and European Commission, Ukraine will have no progress in its candidate status. This again emphasizes that we have to reach really independent constitutional court, not just pretending. We cannot access the club of developed countries without introducing the proper democratic institutions. Now we have seen the readiness from the government to correct the failures in the law and shortcomings in the law, and we are expecting this will happen very soon. During my visit to Brussels, I heard about two reforms which were drastically needed: the reform of the constitutional court selection procedure, and another one which I would like to mention, and one more recommendation to the European Union. When we had seen the very first strange opinion of the Venice Commission, which said, keeping in mind very specific situation in Ukraine and the chance that the constitutional court may be over-politicized. You cannot help Ukraine with such vague statements. You should require from Ukraine compliance with the most fundamental requirements of the rule of law. Let us look at the second criteria, the judiciary reform. As to this indicator, we have reached the progress. We have created the High Council of Justice, and we have, of course, the issue with the judges' self-governments from 2016, but the High Council of Judges nevertheless is created, and this creates big expectations as to the election or selection of the 2,500 of new judges by this council, and we believe this is a good progress which we assessed with this 7 points. The next criteria is anti-corruption. Before giving the floor to an expert in this area, I would like to make a comment. In general, Ukraine faces a lot of dissatisfaction with its anti-corruption reform. And by the way, we avoided 7 points to the anti-corruption indicator or progress of the anti-corruption indicator, and also 7 points to the progress in the judiciary reform indicator. So anti-corruption, it comprises two requirements: appointment of the head of special anti-corruption prosecution, and the second was appointment of the director of National Anti-Corruption Bureau. So we believe that 2-3 weeks added to the selection procedure would not be a big deal, but they will allow to make the selection procedure better. So efficient anti-corruption investigations are the key to anti-corruption work, and these both bodies they demonstrate some progress, but whether this is 110% successful progress, as Ivanna called it, I'm not sure. And I believe that Ukrainian parliament should do more in order to stimulate Ukrainian anti-corruption bodies to work more efficiently. The anti-corruption prosecutor's office and its efficient work is one of preconditions of macro-financial assistance to Ukraine. And it is expected that by the end of this, Ukraine has to do some definite steps in terms of the independence. So it becomes more and more clear that we need to have some safeguards in prevention of corruption. That is, both NABU and SAP should be able to trace back all the assets gained by Ukrainian officials during this war, and to carry out necessary investigations. This will give us higher chances to get positive evaluation from the European Commission. Thank you for your intervention. Now we have a fourth indicator. This is transparency and law enforcement. When we speak about the implementation of FATF standards in prevention of money laundering, Ukraine had passed several important laws. Here I mean implementation of the final beneficiaries assessment procedure, and nevertheless there is some setback in with this law, because it contains one regulation which limits the period for stronger financial monitoring of previous officials. Actually, the former politically politically involved persons, PEPs, they have to remain PEPs and the subject of increased financial monitoring for a longer period of time. In order to comply with these time limits, Ukraine has to correct this only one provision in the law. As Ivanna mentioned about shortcomings in our newly passed legislation, this is about this very law. We have to amend this law with proper time periods. And also passage of several other laws is needed. That is, the parliament has to play its role. Anti-oligarch reform. One of our colleagues contributed to the development of comprehensive plan of law enforcement bodies. The plan is being developed. It is submitted to the president for approval. As of now, we cannot publicize it. We are waiting for the approval of the president and for publication of this plan. And we expect to have this plan and then to review the measures in line with this plan. When the plan will be approved by the president, Ukraine will start its work on the action plan. That's why it has gained only 2 points. So anti-oligarch reform. This criteria had stuck, or it's the progress with this criteria has stuck with the slow actions of the European partners. Ukraine had passed innovative law on the de-oligarchization. The European Union, at the level of the European Commission, requested to amend this law in its recommendations, but as of now, Ukraine has not received the specific features which our European partners want to see changed. I have a feeling that in this case, the Venice Commission feels reservations in expressing opinion that might be dissatisfactory for Ukraine or whatever. Now, I would like to encourage Ukrainian members of parliament to discuss this question with the European colleagues. That is, what do they want to change in this law about de-oligarchization? We have to move forward in this aspect. Now, the next criteria. This is the legislation about media. This is very interesting recommendation, which says they get rid of the negative impact in the media and empower independent media regulator. Since the previous candidate check, the law on media was passed and it will come into force since March 31 this year. So it will take some time to implement the law, and a bit later this year we will understand whether this law is bad or good. Nevertheless, this is the law which harmonizes Ukrainian legislation with the EU directive on mass media, but it is not a full implementation of the directive, because the European directive comprises both advertising and mass media, while Ukrainian law is only about mass media, and our Ukrainian law about advertising still requires its harmonization. What is major criticism as to the past law on mass media? There are some people who keep saying that all the legislation in mass media is bad. These are those people who do not want any regulation of some areas of media. For example, the internet publications. Of course, this is not a comfortable situation for those who have this internet publications, and those people have access to the international arena and the International Union of Journalists, and these organizations they more value the opinion of their member journalists, etc., than the opinion of other members of the civil society. Assessment to which extent legislation about mass media is good in terms of the independence of a regulator. The independence, the regulator is sufficiently independent. For example, there are good criteria for the regulator independence. And the members of the regulator will be appointed by the president and the parliament in equal proportions. Several years ago, Mr. Venislavsky suggested something which violated the rights of the president and thus violated the constitution. That was corrected, and now we have a formulated law about how about creation of the selection committee. We'll see how it will work. The procedure is simple and good. I think this is a good sign that we have committee in place, selection committee in place, and this is a step forward. The regulator is provided with the powers. The regulator members are appointed in equal numbers by the president and the parliament. That is, we have done maximum that was possible to be done in legislation in terms of the media regulator. And the law on media a bit conflicts with the European regulations. The Council of Europe requires all the public broadcasting corporations to have truly independent management, prevented from any interference from the state. We have in Ukraine Suspilne media and one TV channel, parliamentary TV channel, Rada, which has no guarantees of no interference into its editorial policy from the state. This TV channel had become the strong channel of the people in power, and actually this is the state channel which exists beyond the system of public broadcasting, and it is not part of this it is not subject to this regulation of state media. I would like to add that this very criteria, it is quite focused criteria. It does not require any comprehensive assessment. It just simply requires implementation of the European directive about mass media and advertising. Many people who are present here, they perhaps are not satisfied with the United Media Marathon, which we have on Ukrainian TV now. But this is not about the reform itself. Also, when we discuss the salaries of the members of National Committee on Broadcasting, I would not advise to have it at a low level, because you cannot have the independent regulator with the small salaries of its members. And I fully agree what was said about our Union of Journalists, which made poor references about Ukrainian media legislation in Brussels. Actually, they have launched a campaign against Ukraine at the European level, saying that that new law on media introduces censorship in Ukraine. And our last criteria, this is about criteria about national minorities. Here we have rather strange situation. We have awarded 8 plus points to this criteria because the law about national minorities was passed, which fortunately was strongly amended after first reading, and all the recommendations from the opposition, from the Council of Europe, from civil society were accepted. At the same time, we observed counteraction from Hungary and Romania, who expressed their dissatisfaction with this law. This does not mean that this law has to be changed, but this only shows that tough intergovernmental negotiations with these states have to start. But actually the law is passed passed in compliance with the conventions which are binding for Ukraine and to which Ukraine is a party. But nevertheless, the necessary amendments does not require any drastic changes. I think that all the results which I'd shown suggest that we will be able to implement the requested quite quickly. Unfortunately, the lady does not speak into the mic, and it is not possible to translate the comments from the audience. Irina Gus, Suspilna, whether you expect to have any amendments to the law on constitutional court in line with the recommendations, recommendations of Venice Commission, and what do you think? As far as I understand, the Cabinet of Ministers has been preparing its amendments. As for the plans in the Parliament, I believe that we won't have any problems with the implementation of these amendments. My individual experience of communication with the candidates to the constitutional courts court shows that there's a quite reputable and professional people, and they cannot understand why the activists have to decide whether these judges they are acceptable as candidates or not. And we have to keep this in mind and to find a trade-off and good balance between the transparency of the procedure and the reputation of those people who I'm not sure when the draft law from the government will arrive. It seems to me that we are not learning good lessons from the previous mistakes. But during discussions in plenary room, my colleagues tried to convince that everything was coordinated with the European Commission and Venice Commission. And our committee, by the way, provided an opinion that the draft law could not be approved in the second reading. But we were not given the floor to present our special opinion. Actually, this was the source of the whole problem. And now in the parliament we do not have any other draft laws. And the next day my colleagues and myself submitted the draft law, which includes all the recommendations of the Venice Commission, and it is not included into the list of laws to be reviewed, and unfortunately I do not expect it will be included. This once again will undermine our efforts as to the candidate status. I would like to defend the activists. There is no word about activists in the draft law. It is not about activists, it is about members of international organizations. I cannot imagine candidates to the Supreme, to the Constitutional Court who do not want to be assessed by Sir Henry Cooper from the UK. This is what European Commission keeps in mind when it advises to have independent international experts in the selection committee. No further questions? Thank you to all the speakers and all the participants. Today, after panel discussion with our experts from the civil society, we will mobilize our political will to gain higher scores in the assessment of implementation of these requirements as to the EU. So let's continue our work. We will continue to do this monitoring and actually the summit results will go beyond these seven criteria, because there are many things which are important for us. We need a victory, and we need the defeat of Russia, and for doing this we need weapon, we need economic support, and we need the isolation of the Russian Federation and the future punishment.